Director of the Creative Writing Program. I have a mini announcement. If any of you are in Matthew Ryan Shelton's 1701 class, I have a sign-up sheet. He wants to know that you have been here, so come see me. Otherwise, I can't wait to introduce Heidi Lynn Staples, who is here with us. I'm going to do a mini bio for Heidi Lynn and then have her come up. Paulina, would you like to do the bio? Do you think you can do it? You've been practicing. I think you can do it. Do you want to hold the mic?
Is it this?
This is, yes.
I can just push it down.
Okay. Are you sure? I'll stand up here with you. You can do it. There we go.
Okay. All right, here you go. Here, I'm going to hold this for you. How's that? Am I? Does this work?
I can.
Got it?
Heidi Lynn Staples' debut collection, Guess Can Gallop, was selected by Brenda Hillman as a winner of the New Issues Poetry Prize. She is the author of 3 other collections, including 2018 with the poet Amy King. She co-edited Poets for Living Waters, an international poetry response to the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, and Big Energy Poet, Ecopoetry Thinks Climate Change. She teaches at the MFA Program at the University of Alabama.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you. This is, yes, Paulina, Ellen's daughter. Thank you so much. Here, another round of applause, please. Woo-hoo, thank you.
Can I stand on the stage?
I don't know. It's up to your mom. Oh, my goodness. That was amazing. That's like the best intro of all time. Thank you, Paulina. Where's all my stuff? Hang on. Excuse me. I hid it from myself. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ellen, for bringing me, and Sean, and Lori. I don't know if Lori's here, but she was a huge help also. And Carrie for bringing me from the airport, and all of you for being here. I really appreciate it. Connecticut's beautiful. It's great to be back. I haven't been here since 1985. My dad used to live here, and he took me to New York City, where I decided I wanted to be a mad, hysterical poet on the streets of New York, and it's working out very well, except I live in Alabama. That's the only thing. Anyway, so I'm going to read from some newer work today. Some of it's forthcoming from and then I'm also going to read a little bit from my last book, Noise Event, and then I'll talk about literary editing and the recent anthology that I brought out with Amy King. Cool. And I don't know if there's time for questions or anything like that. Yeah, and then we'll have some questions. Cool. Awesome. Okay. I have a few visuals I wanted to share with you as we go through this. Excuse me. Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to start with this image. The first pieces I'm going to read are from a series of poems that use language from trash, particularly from trail bars. And I decided to read from this project because part of the thing I was asked to talk about was balancing writing with editing. And as a writer, you have to balance writing with everything. Work, family, friends, sitting in the sun. You have to balance it. And so I started this project when I had a job as a learning center director. I was hired to begin a learning center, and I was working 9 to 5 in this learning center, and I had a young child. It was my first job after finishing my PhD, and I was on the job market. I was super busy. And so on Fridays, I would work. I said every Friday I'm going to write for at least an hour. That was it. So I'm not asking a lot to have 1 hour a week. And I would put a little sign on my office door and say, not available, right? And so I've developed a manuscript out of that, and I'm going to read 3 of those poems. Trail. I went to see you for your body, your taste buds, and the world. It felt fake, yet also it's kind. We do things differently to contain my father, sustainable and whole. We laugh at the table, good source of convenient and wholesome. You're near yet far, Father, the kind thing. I went to see you for your body, your taste buds, and the world. Oh, you so close beside me, made from once you could see and pronounce. Now this, not you, this who cannot pronounce. This laughs so easily, this no more than ever contains my Father, sustainable and whole. How your teeth need cleaning, how you wear a diaper, how you're strapped in, how your hair has been washed, so soft. How you say, who are you? To your granddaughter, my daughter, our kin. How your voice, the sound of, a brand of delicious. I went to see you for your body, your taste buds, and the world. This mouth, these eyes, every mirror's ingredients, the name you gave me when you could see and pronounce, somehow contain my Father, sustainable and whole. As we left the unit, I hated the false compromises of the daily values. How bitter we all have to go home. What brings you to the door? Home is made from your body, your taste buds, and the world, wherefrom contains my Father, sustainable and whole. Well, that works out because the next ones are actually from Cliff Bars, not Kind Bars, and I'm not paid by either company. Anyway, I should work on that, right? Product placement. All right, Trail. Dear Kay, you are better if used by the date other than your husband, you confided, yet drew a line in accordance with standards of the U.S. Department of how you cried last night. Sobbed, you said, sobbed and sobbed. Oh, sea salt distributed by the small planet of my oldest friend. Were that I were there to be a significant source of concentrate, extract, or sunflower. Trail. Summer camp is where I drop my daughter off whenever and wherever I can. Summer camp is no fun, is not nice, contains, everyone kills insects, contains nuts. Summer camp contains. Summer camp is the little cabin at summer camp, which will digest you slowly like a giant snake. Summer camp is unnatural, is genetically engineered, could cause cancer. Summer camp is dedicated to making a mountain out of a nice morning. Summer camp is a trail that leads children up the mountain and off a cliff. Summer camp is not for the planet. Summer camp is not your ordinary horror, is worse than all the Fortune 500 companies combined. Summer camp is the source of everything that is the opposite of goodness, including cholesterol. Summer camp is a world without gum or the sea or any of the ingredients for a wholesome life. Summer camp is helping no one, folks. Summer camp is dedicated to turning whenever and wherever you are unsweetened. Summer camp is to chocolate as Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, is to delicious. Yet summer camp is so sweet. You, diabetic, high glycemic, slip into a coma. Yes, summer camp is so sweet. Summer camp is where I pick her up, where she is a sunflower. Summer camp is the sun. Ambivalent feelings about summer camp, right? This next poem just is a poem I wrote fairly recently, and it was in APR, and I really like it. It doesn't have a home, it's not in a book, but I'm going to read it to share with you. Anti-antiphon. O man-made machine who fakes man as thing and forsaker, the rope shipped around our neck of the woods, come to enslave us to our owned hours, O body become bought. O smartphone who flames from the mouth if a screen, waiting in the pockets, lights in the mall's smallest darkness, come recognize our vices. O keyboard, O Facebook and social media and World Wide Web, whose ever-widening buyer has been let loose and pawned the words. Come and bring forth, friend, let us bow together before your cyclops. O keyboard and clicker of the digital age, who can recognize my face from among the masses and hunt me down and destroy me from any remote location, come and watch over us. O biotech implant, over become lover, O biotech virus of neural plaquing, how skull no longer offers isolation. O predator drone, O hummingbird drone, O bee drone swarm, how hovers. Come and let us watch a man-made machine unmake a man unto forsaken thing. Come into the classrooms of our youth and hear how we laugh. O robotic nurse, who can sing, who can dance, who stands ready with outstretched metal, rubber-encased arms, and movement-tracking tearless eyes before our bodily suffering, she shall not waver. Come and deliver into their beds our soft bodies, pliable babies, into your arms, into your arms, into your arms, forever, more and more. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to read 6 poems now from Ahsahta, which is forthcoming this spring. I spent 2 years camping with my daughter around the Mobile Bay watershed. I actually got like $9,000 from the University of Alabama to go camping with my daughter. And because I was interested in trying to become a poet of place and think about what that meant and learn about Alabama and sort of get down on the ground and actually just feel what that's like. And research Alabama too. Alabama is one of the most biodiverse places in the world, actually. There's a part of Mobile Bay watershed, Mobile Bay, the Tensaw Delta, that is the most biodiverse place on the planet. It's not like charismatic megafauna, it's small things, fish and lizards and snails and things like that. So that's interesting. But then it's also one of the most unregulated places. So like we went to all the state parks, well not all of them, but to many of the state parks in the watershed. And then I also went to Chem Waste, which is the largest toxic waste dump in the United States, where all the Superfund sites were relocated. So that was interesting. And on that site, there's a designated wildlife area. And then there are places where they bury all of the toxic waste under the ground. So these poems come from that experience. And let's see. Sorry, these are the poems I just read to you. I'm showing these to you because they have these symbols in them. And when I send these out, sometimes the Denver Quarterly happily took some, but people will say, I'll get a message from an editor, and they'll be like, the formatting seems to be messed up in your poem. And I'm like, no, I did that on purpose. Is a word, it comes from the word Albamaha, which is plural for Alabama people. Alabama is actually a tribe. And I wanted to reference that history without appropriating it, so I redacted the consonants in Alabama, and that's where you get So this is, and so this is from an encounter with the best beetle and just thinking about it. Of the best beetle. I wish more of my days slow danced hand on the butt with rotting logs in forests. My mandibles their rivers. O art anthropod who art invertebrate. O robust bookish bug, quiet. What sort of library are you? My antenna extinct species, come black as a nightdress. My elytra deeply grooved by years spent backpacking through fear's lips. It's more sometimes I wish this antenna were curved when relaxed, you know? Bess, we log you so mulch. Some days God gets so sky and flighty flittin' the trees. Later days, ground has undergone a constellation. Gathers caves, sods flow in hummus shelf like a past's new fate. God's sleep wed to the world, and you are officiant. Tree is beetle, beetle is tree, that fall we kneel to. Okay, so I'll just go there, yeah. So this is Yelp, Oak Mountain State Park. So I started looking at these Yelp reviews and then using some of the structure of a Yelp review to write reviews of going to these parks. This state park had grieving to do, had lost its father, and this year a friend with 2 small children to raise. Signs warned of the pit vipers, cottonmouth, timberback. The father had been long ill and long somehow estranged. The friend had been unreliable, gone down on uppers, which is why the park is here instead of at funerals. At the petting farm, the pot-bellied pig goes insane, worriedly pacing the border between here and there. Better to join the church group gathered around kumquats. The tree trunks, thick as a man's arm, stretch over our heads. In autumn, the oak's leaves rattle. Is that a warning? We have no choice but to come closer, sleep under them. In Oak Mountain Park, we slept in a not yet claimed hole. It actually wasn't better to join the church group, but that's another story. It was a nice idea. Not a nice reality. Okay. Because, you'll see in this poem, one of the things that happened when I was camping is I got really nervous because we were in a tent alone, 2 ladies out in the tent alone, and I was like, what am I scared of? What am I imagining? And I realized I was imagining a man with a serrated knife like cutting through the tent. I think that happened to somebody in the 80s. It's like, I'm sure it's happened other times, but I remember hearing that in the news and it sort of stuck with me. And I told that story at the fire with these people we didn't know, and these young men just suddenly zoomed in on me when I told that story, and I got totally creeped out. Anyway, Yelp, Rickwood Caverns State Park. This state park was extremely unslept. It's a fox and ah were the only ones at number 13. So it was very tent is so flimsy. What was that noise? Yet what stirs in you when you leave the bread out for fox? What wreck, decapitating metal trash can heads all fright? No man with a serrated knife was observed. The next biggest attraction was watching water drip, forming formations an inch for every 100 or so years. A wet 250 million year old cave. B on her scooter in the spunlight. C, playing poker by the campfire and riding, and D, living in a world that is not spent nor saving. E, we camped at Rickwood Caverns in a vulvic fold. Let me see, so I've been going for about 20 minutes now, have I? Or no, is that 20 minutes? Did we start at 5 after? Yeah, so I'll just move, I'm gonna stop there with the poems. And move on to talking about editing. That's the right timing, right? 20 and 20? Yeah, cool. So I have an assistant, Paulina, who is going to help me and hand out some things. Thank you. Cool, thank you so much. So I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Northwest Florida. Really beautiful. It was undeveloped. A paper company owned most of the land at the time and the military. And it was undeveloped, and it was amazing. And then it got developed, and that's what Noise Event actually takes on. It was pretty elegiac and hard to adjust to. And then the BP oil spill happened, and I was really pretty gutted by that when it happened. So I'll back up for a second. Waiting for this to go around. Does everybody have a copy? Not yet. So for me, when that happened, I was finishing my PhD. I was studying ecopoetics was one of my areas of study, and also 20th century American poetry. And in the 20th century American poetry line, I was reading a lot of the work by people who were writing about Vietnam and a lot of the stuff that was going on in the 60s, civil rights movement, the women's movement. And I would find myself crying reading this work. And I had never had the experience where I would read all of it at once, and I suddenly experienced the history through affect and through the feeling. And I was so grateful to have that record of the feeling of the time. And so when the BP oil spill happened, I had the idea of creating some sort of affective record. And Muriel Rukeyser talks about extending the document, which is what that is. You extend the historical document by including the affective experience of the history, the facts. You've got facticity and quantification, and then you've got the quality of the experience, and that's something that art, literature can do. So what I've done here with the handout, thank you so much, Paulina. I'm calling it 5 Steps Toward Real Grounds for Hope, and that's coming from this quote by Ursula Le Guin. Hard times are coming when are here, when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine real grounds for hope. So it's like, well, so if you want to be part of creating a consciousness rather than just consuming the consciousness that's profit-driven and is meant to change your behavior so that you'll go buy stuff, but if you want to help create consciousness that's based in a desire for beauty and ethics and politics that's just, then literary publishing is one way to do that. So you define your purpose. That's one of the first things you need to do. What is it that makes you want to do this? And for me, that was what I just explained about what happened in the Gulf, and just thinking about advocating, helping people grieve what was happening, but also advocate and think about wonder and joy and value those things. So find a model, right? So that's the next thing. This is Poets for Living Waters. This is the site. I'll show you. So we did a picture. So this is the last one. So we do poems, and then so you have the poems. And then I wanted to do, okay, I just randomly clicked on, there we go, a statement of some sort. The person would have a statement, picture of the poet, and a bio. Okay. So I wanted to have, where did it go? I have it on here. Here we go. It was based on Poets Against the War, which was a response to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. I remembered that project, admired it very much. Against wasn't something that I wanted to do. I wanted to do something for something. Like, what do I want in the world? What I want is our living waters, right? So, but it's modeled on that idea. Cool. So there's conventional print, obviously. There's online, and then there are like publication as object things that people do too. This is a really neat thing. I just wanted to share it with you all. They publish literature like on objects, like literally on objects. I don't know if I can make that big, you know? That's the magazine, if you will. You know, it's so cool. You can do anything, you know? It's neat. I don't know, how many people in here are going to go to AWP? Anybody going to AWP? I know some, no? Well, what's that? Right, yeah. Well, when it comes your way, you know, go. It's a big lit fest is what it is. I mean, it seems, it gets a bad rap for being highly professionalized, but actually if you look at the books and stuff, there's stuff like this there. It's pretty cool, just people geeking out on journals, you know, it's really fun. Cool, so we found a model, and then we went DIY. You can go DIY. You don't have to think of it as something, this big sort of out there thing that, you know, just make something up. We went and did WordPress. Where is it? There we go. We just used WordPress to create Poets for Living Water. So this is a WordPress platform, and we got a huge response from people. And a lot of online magazines, that's what they are. They're a blog platform. So it's just to demystify it a little bit. And then print on demand is a really new thing. If you want to do print, like people, Amy King, my co-editor, she and a bunch of friends have a press, Bettering American Poetry, and they're just using Amazon. BlazeVox, which published this, which I really am very happy with how it looks. It's print on demand. It costs him almost nothing. All he had to do was design it, figure out how to get it into the print on demand format, and then, you know, people buy it, and he has it printed, but he doesn't have to pay anything up front. Which is a fairly new way of doing it. So that's cool. And then you can hand stitch things, like people make hand stitched chapbooks and stuff like that. But it's really exciting. And then the other thing would be to work with collaborators. Like with Amy, I had the content, I had the vision, I had the need to do it. She had all these contacts. She was in New York, and she's from the South, so she felt some affinity, but she's constantly doing things like that, like collaborating with people, which is cool. But it's really fun to collaborate. That's another reason to do it. So for me, it's not about trying to find a balance. It's about trying to participate in the community in its fullness, and not to work in isolation. And also to have reciprocity, right? Because I'm so grateful to my editors. I mean, I owe my whole career to people who have said, oh yeah, I'll publish that. So when I was in graduate school, Third Bed was a magazine back in the day, and it was a bunch of friends. They put it together, and they published my first poems. And then that magazine, when they did it, I was like, what are y'all doing? You think you're editing? Well, the magazine did really well. I was very skeptical and just didn't realize that's what you do. You just go, you know what? I'm an editor, and that's it. And then you are. Cool. So you can get readers. You know, you can create readers. Just say, do you want to be a reader for my magazine? You know, you don't even necessarily have to know someone particularly well. You can know of them and ask them if they would be a reader or a consultant or be on your board. It's another way to make contacts with people, and it's another reason to do it, so that it's not a lonely thing. Cool. Let me see. Where are we? Okay. So then I have Evolve, right? So we started with the journal. And with the journal, it just, you know, we had the initial thing, we were like, but lots of people were sending poems in. We did some actions too, and it was just initially imagined as something that would support people doing actions to draw attention to the oceans. And I'm really interested in the value of the humanities in relationship to the material world, like the way of knowing that is art versus science, and the two connecting with each other. But that's where we started. And then from there, we wanted to do a print version. But by the time we got around to the print version, because like life happens and it took a long time, the guy, Jeffrey at BlazeVox, who had agreed to do it, was like, that's kind of actually out of date. Like, people don't want a print version of that anymore. If you'd done it right away, it would have been fine. But I was like, yeah, I was on the market. I was finishing my PhD, and I had a little kid, so it didn't happen. He's like, well, do you have other ideas? And I was like, well, let me think. And we came up with Big Energy Poets, Ecopoetry Thinks Climate Change, which is a totally different project. But it evolved out of that project. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. And some of the poets that are in here were in the Poets for Living Waters, and some of them weren't. And again, we just thought, well, who would fit? And it kept me learning about new poets. So that's another reason to do it. It's like I've met people. There's this guy, Adam Dickinson, who's in here. He is so interesting. I had never heard of him. And he contacted me when he heard about the project. He went and took fecal samples and blood samples from himself and sent them to labs to find out what sorts of chemicals are in his body. Yeah, and then he would write poems about them. And when he told me that, I was like, yeah, I don't know, sure, send the work, like whatever. The poems probably aren't very good, right? The poems are amazing. They're great, and it's so interesting. So that's another motivation for doing this, is it creates connection and gets you to think in new ways. So you're constantly learning. So then, most recently from there, we've had a new project where we're doing this Living Watershed Poets in Residence. So there's a marine lab near me in Alabama. It's called Dauphin Island Marine Lab, and they do marine research. And they also are starting an arts festival this year. So I had contacted them to see if they wanted to collaborate in some way, and they were like, yeah, we're doing an arts festival. What do you want to do? And I was like, well, I don't know, let me make something up. So I made up this idea of poets in residence, Living Watershed Poets in Residence. And there's a graduate student who had come to talk to me when we were recruiting him, who knew about something like this in Washington State. And I was like, if you come here, we'll do something. So he did, and I was like, you're Poets for Living Waters, Living Watershed Poet in Residence at Dauphin Island Sea Lab. And we're going to try to do this in other watersheds. And so he's going to go down there and do some poetry workshops and create these, like, what did he call it? Like, you know when you go to an aquarium and you touch all the creatures in the water, a pool, right? He's going to do that, but with writing and poems and stuff, like typewriters. Yeah, it's so neat. And then I have this quote that I like by Alice Notley. She says, "Our production of the world, our interpretation of it, what we've been told to experience, and what we've been told we have to do, both worry and distress me. I don't want to live in someone else's dream," right? So the culture we consume is someone else's dream. And I mean, to a degree, I do want to live in other people's dreams to a degree. I mean, I read other people's work, but I don't want to live in late-stage capitalist consumer culture media dream. So that's the reason to create independent culture. So live in your own dream is the last one, about evolve. Constantly do that, constantly evolve your dream. I wanted to read a little piece from the intro of Big Energy Poets, just to give you a sense of what it is. Okay, so it's just 2 paragraphs. Big Energy Poets, Ecopoetry Thinks Climate Change, provides those who may come after us with some answer to the question, as Anne Waldman writes in Manatee Humanity, what were they thinking, stupid fuckers? Did those of us situated within cultural denial give a damn? Yes, perhaps we cannot damn the genocidal catastrophes of climate change, but these pages do record affective response. The collection emerges from Poets for Living Waters, a similarly co-edited online international poetry response to the 2010 BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, the biggest man-made environmental disaster in U.S. history, that monumentally farcical botch with implications unto geologic time. This book is not an excerpt of that anthology. Instead, it is a diverse sampling of 21 contemporary writers, several of whom are published in Poets for Living Waters, and several whose work fit with this particular anthology's purposes. I won't list every single name, but Lucas de Lima's in here. Did they get the bookstore, get it in? Yeah, flip to Lucas de Lima's pieces in here. They're particularly powerful and amazing. And then also Adam Dickinson is there, C.A. Conrad. And Stephen Collis has a manifesto of the biotariat, which is really fascinating if you haven't seen it, where he takes the idea of the proletariat and extends it into all of life, the bio on the planet. It makes sense when you start to think about Monsanto controlling the gene. Okay, so each poet in here offers a representative sampling of poetry. Let me just, here we go, get this back to our picture. A description of the writing process, an ecopoetic statement, a perceptual challenge. That was the thing I was most excited about. So it's not a writing prompt, it's a perceptual challenge, and a suggested reading list. So There's a lot there. The perceptual challenges and reading lists are written as invitations into the collective yet individual process of cultivating holistic attention to our ecological predicament while situated within large-scale popular denial. And it goes on. So check it out. That's my plug at the end of my talk. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I guess I'll open it up for questions now. If there are any. Yes?
Have you found, hello, I'm
Hi.
Marisha.
Hi, Marisha.
Hey. Have you found that there's been any sort of like forthcoming generation? Do you feel that younger people have been coming to you in writing, or do you feel that older people have been coming to you in writing, or do you feel that this eco-conscious has really just stemmed across from like a socially active portion of the population through your writing experience?
I think like all of us are really concerned in writing about it. I will say that I feel like the millennial generation has some really exciting energy and impatience. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. Yeah. I mean, in my class, I taught a course on climate change in literature, and it was really interesting to read the students' work and to talk about the despair and confusion. But I feel it's a different sort of energy. I mean, it's a very different position, because when I was growing up, it was like, oh wow, things are going extinct, huh? And now it's like, holy shit, like we got to preserve some stuff. Like we gotta figure this out. Gotta have something left, you know? Like how can we survive? So it's a different experience. What about you? What do you think about that?
No, I wonder too, because I feel that impatience certainly with the people both in classroom and out of classroom. I actually, I worked for a little bit in a national wildlife refuge down in Texas, down in the Gulf.
Cool.
And there's certainly that, it's almost weird to put that energy on a word, but anger. Like,
I was just thinking anger.
Yeah, like
absolutely.
Anger. Like, why is this coming? Where is this happening? Like, and then, it's really easy to just point the finger up, be like, oh, you, older, you, like, parents, you, government. But, yeah, I just wonder, because then I wonder also, like, how many people have maybe, like, you have seen within the writing world who are coming through and are trying to publish, because I feel a very general phenomenon is also realizing that people's anger, a lot has been turning into just like, all right, I give up. Like, all right, there's no changing it. All right, like.
And that's where you get the denial and disassociation.
Yeah.
I mean,
disassociation. That's the word.
yeah, and that's what that's what we're doing. We're just disassociating. Yeah. We're like, it's not happening, right? Yeah, but actually, what we do matters. We're in a system, and you can't actually get out of the system. Everything you do has implications in the system. Well, that's actually really good news. I mean, you're every time you buy something, you're voting for what's going to happen inside the system you're in. So. Any other questions? Thank you, Marisha. That was great. Okay.
So this experience, this project, different, you read some magazine that was print, journal.
Oh, Parakeet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a while. What's different about this experience, print versus online, or just purpose?
Yeah, the purpose, yeah. I think the difference is primarily purpose, yeah. I mean, when we made Parakeet, we had this, and I could have brought a copy of that. We had a print journal, my husband and I and a friend, called Parakeet, and it was cool, kind of couture design. It was neat, really liked it. It was very aesthetic. It was about the style and worldview and politics are not necessarily divorced from each other. I was really interested in the avant-garde, and I was coming out of a particular stance toward dominant culture, but it wasn't overtly environmentally inflected. I didn't understand consciously. I was trying to find my way into understanding the role between language and consciousness and the way that we interact and create the material reality around us. But it's the primary tool. I mean, when you say tree, you just separated something out. You didn't from its context. You erased all of the organisms that are on it, living on it. I mean, tree is a really powerful word as a tool. you know. So anyway, but that was something I was trying to reach toward, but wasn't really invested in the way that I've gotten invested in it. So it was just part of that process. Plus, the person I was collaborating with, Deb, was very interested in style too. So the thing we had in common was style versus Amy. The thing we have in common, I think, is more political interest. So, yeah. But in fairness, like in terms of like constantly evolve, I might not have done Poets for Living Waters if I hadn't done Parakeet first, you know. So, yeah.
Do you have a sense of just kind of where you stand in terms of sort of print publishing, online publishing, you know, in the literary magazine world?
Do you mean, do I think one's like, is there a hierarchy of like, if you're going to do it, or?
No, like, you know, what would you suggest? What do you think has a better potential of reaching people and, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, online's going to have a huge reach. I mean, an international reach. Like I'm helping do the English language editing of a Indian magazine. This person got my book in Calcutta at a book fair, but he got the book, which was print, you know, and then we were like talking for years, just like chatting online, which is so cool. And then he's like, do you want to do this? I was like, cool, yeah. So now I'm doing that. And then that gets disseminated to people that I know here. So online has the potential to reach many more people. But then there's something about the print it's a completely different reading experience. You can't be surveilled when you read it. You can pass it to someone and no one knows you passed it. I really like that. I really highly recommend we keep that going. So I like the printed word too. I think it's really important. So you can do print on demand. It was really expensive. When we did Parakeet, we had to pay like $4,000 to get all these boxes to arrive with these journals that then we had to figure out what to do with them, you know. Like, I was like, oh my God. We still have boxes, you know. But it's different now. If you want to do print, then just do print and print now as many as you want. Yeah. And then you hand them to people, which I really like. Like at AWP, you walk up to somebody and they have their stuff and they hand it to you. So it's very different, kind of like the farmer's market. Yeah?
Hi, I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, but how did you get started as an editor?
I just decided to do it. Well, but that's like, oh, I just decided to do it. But it was actually in graduate school having a professor who had just decided to do it with a friend when he was an undergraduate. It's Verse Magazine. Brian Henry and Andrew Zawacki, they were buddies, and they're like, hey, let's start Verse Magazine. And then it became this huge thing just because they were like, we're going to do it. You know? And then a student of his named Ethan Paquin started Slope Magazine, which is an online magazine and a press. And that started while I was a graduate student, and I watched it unfold. And so I saw this thing happen, and I was like, he just decided to do that. He's just some dude, right? And so when you see other people do it, it demystifies it. Or you can just decide that it's demystified and start one. That was part of how it happened. Yeah?
In your introduction to like big energy poets, you talked a little bit about the complex relationship of the self of the poet and eco-poetry. Can you talk about that a little bit?
The self of the poet and eco-poetry? I don't remember what I said. It's been a while, but like, can I look at my notes? Are you talking about like the I, like the non-self? Yeah. Well, that goes back to the idea that like you're in a system. Right? Like you're constituted by all kinds of systems, economic systems, environmental systems, just like political systems, right? And if you lived in a different time and place, different body, you would be different. So when you start to really realize that and imagine and just sit and think about the way that you're constituted by systems, and you realize that you don't have a stable self, an immutable soul that is like pure and can't be changed by circumstances and influences. Like influence comes from water, like things that flow in. You know, things flow through us. We're permeable. We're not static. So, yeah. So how does one write in a way that enacts that knowledge? That's one of the questions of ecopoetics. How do you write in a way that doesn't have like a stable eye that's looking out? Over there's nature. And over there are the bad guys, going back to that thing like, oh, I'm angry at them. They did it, right? But it's like, wait, you're in it. So you are constituted by it. You only exist in the way that you exist because it exists. So what do you do with that? That's a creative moment, you know. You're like, okay, I'm going to do something that's going to make it do something else. Paulina, and then we'll go to you. Yeah. She can ask a question?
Is there any more jobs that I can help out with?
Oh, good question. Oh, I'll think about that. Thank you. I will think about that. That's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about your process with writing and like picking a topic. Like, do you sit down saying, I want to write today, what should I write about? Or do you see a topic and say, like, I think this would be good to write about this?
That's a great question. Mostly it's sitting down and saying, I'm going to write. And I often will choose a form. And then I'll be like, well, what's on my mind right now? Or what do I see? Or sometimes I'll just steal words and make something. Because we're always sensing things, and most of it goes into our subconscious and unconscious. So, but our deepest life, right, is our fullest mind, and that's what art is for, is to help us access that deeper awareness. So for me, that's why it's like, I'm going to sit down and just write something, because what am I thinking about? What's really going on with me and the world? What am I ignoring in order to function? Because we have to ignore most of what's important, really, in order to sort of, make sure we've got milk in the fridge, So, what about you?
I don't know. I kind of just, I do like sometimes I see a topic and it's like, I want to discuss this in some way, and so then it's like, well, I think writing about it would be a good way to. Other times it's just like, I'm writing something and then you brainstorm, so you come up with something. So I'm a little of both.
I'm glad you asked that, because my answer actually was pretty inaccurate. Because the book that's coming out was very intentional. I wanted to get to know this place, and I wanted to force myself out of what I call the goldfish in in Tuscaloosa. There's this circle that's the whole town, and you just end up, there's the university, I'm going home, I'm going to get my groceries. There's the university, I'm going home, it's just small. And that was going to be all I knew of Alabama, unless I got out and looked around. And I read a small sampling. It really didn't take on much more complex issues that are really hard to figure out how to write about. It's very hard to figure out how to write about race in Alabama. I haven't written about it yet. I'm still just kind of staring at it going, holy shit, the zoo and the botanical gardens are written on a mass pauper's grave, and most of the people are people of color. And people are going around, it's like one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country is on top of this place where the people have decomposed. When they unearthed, turned the soil, there weren't bodies. It's just, I don't even know what to say about that. But it's the kind of thing I discovered, I haven't written about that, but I wrote, going to the Kim Waste, I wrote a lot of poems about that, and I specifically went to Kim Waste in order to have the experience and change myself. So I started to think about the self as a creative site. So you go seeking experiences in order to change your brain, your psychology. I was trying to get attached. There's a physicist named Jane Bennett who talks about enchantment and pursuing joy so that you'll experience attachment. So if you go and try to have profoundly joyful experiences in a place, then you're going to have that attachment that you get as a child, right? Because when you're a child, if you're fortunate enough to have this experience, you have a kind of great capacity for joy, and just sort of you're unfiltered and wow, it comes all in, and you're very attached, and that's why we have that nostalgia for place. So I was trying to get something like that, and then write about it and care, because she has this idea of an ethics of generosity that comes out if you get attached. So I was like, I want to build that in myself, and these are indexing that effort. It's just see, I tried. So it's even more than sitting down to write about something. It's setting out to get an experience and then try to write about it. Thanks. Yeah.
When you're wearing your editorial hat, what are you looking for in, let's say, a poem for an anthology? Since you write poetry,
Yeah. I'm thinking about that.
What is going to make your head explode if you're looking for poetry?
That's That's a really difficult question to answer, and it's a great question. With this anthology, it was a complicated set of things. It's not just the one poem, right? And so I wanted certain points of view represented, so that's one thing. But then within that, I guess it's like a stance toward the language, where there's where again, like when we talk about being like in the culture and it being like a creative moment, where you're like, this is a moment of creation, where the person is in that same stance in relationship to the phrase or the phoneme even, where they're like, hey, this is not a given, this is not necessary, I'm going to make new meaning here, I'm going to say something that hasn't been said exactly like this before. So that's really what gets me like super excited. It's like surprise, like in presence. Yeah. Thanks, that's a good question. Yeah?
I'd like to go back to one question. Can you talk a little bit about those, how the poems that you read earlier, the trail?
Oh, trail, yeah.
Yeah, with the candy bars.
Yeah.
Like, if you could talk about how they came about and how much kind of like something like a formal constraint like leads to a poem.
Yeah, so
Formal task.
yeah, that was a pretty arbitrary thing where it would be like, I'm going to write a poem now. So I suppose it sort of depends on where I'm at in my life and what's going on. In that case, I was working this learning center, and I was trapped in my office. Sorry, will you say the question again? Because I just had flashback to that office. I hated it. It was like the first time that I had to work like that since during retail.
Candy wrappers.
Yeah. How did that create a poem?
Yeah.
Well, what I would do with that, well, I would get the candy wrapper. So I'll just tell you, this doesn't have a thesis yet, like a clear kind of concept exactly. I mean, I was reading A.R. Emmons, and he has a book called Garbage, and thinking about garbage and the fact that we create a lot of garbage, and that was really interesting to me, and trying to break down the barrier between myself and this idea of throwing garbage away and it's over there. So I was trying to, first of all, just sort of estrange myself to my own sort of habits and be like, oh, look, this wrapper is like in my office. Every day I'm eating these trail bars, which isn't healthy. And so, I would just pick words off of it and choose a form. So typically I would just be like, okay, I'm going to choose a form. And then I started writing about my dad also because I was influenced by Ammons, and also the fact that my dad had dementia. And my mom also, I wrote about my mom who had lung cancer. And so Ammons writes about death and grief, and these are all part of the trope of garbage. These are things that we try to think about. They're also like, Joel McSweeney talks about the necropastoral. They're like the things on the other side of the beautiful that we try to pretend aren't there. My trash and my dad stowed away in this nursing home, they were like analogs. So there was that was inspiring it. But I would choose words off of it and then plug them into the poem and just kind of be like, okay, here is a fact from my life and an emotive phrase, and how can I fit it with this, contains, your body or your tongue, your taste buds, and the world. That was like, when you start, if you have that there and you're thinking about someone you love, then suddenly that phrase is your own. Also, it takes it out of the context of commerce, and you reappropriate the language for yourself. It doesn't really tell you much about process, but it was totally improvised. Yeah. That's one thing. It was like improvised.
I remember you talking a little bit about it at the reading last year.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So it's also like the fact that they're improvised is important too. They're not highly wrought, really. They're improvised in the moment, and so the moment passes. It's like improvisation versus chiseling and creating the great monument. So, yeah. Did you have a question, or you? Okay, I think, yeah. Cool, yes? Thanks.
When you're writing or when you're editing your own work, do you ever get frustrated if you're like writing something and it's just not coming out the way you want to, and what you do with that?
Yes, all the time. Especially prose. Oh my God, it's so torturous. I mean, like, it's so hard. I mean, so yes, agonize, moan, complain, get up, go get some more coffee, go do something else. The thing I find, again, most helpful is to just say, I'm going to just do this at this time. And then a word count if I'm doing prose. Poetry is different in terms of word count, but it's form. Again, it's some sort of arbitrary thing, which lets you off the hook on the one hand because you're like, it's just 500 words. I mean, I said I had to do 500 words. They're all crap, but it's 500 words, and I did it. Great. Or it's a, it's a villanelle, and it's not a good villanelle, but it is a villanelle. So there, right? And it just kind of gives you a little something. So that's probably my main coping strategy. And then also just knowing that that's just going to always be there. It doesn't go away. It just doesn't go away. So you're like, okay, so you're always here, doubt and frustration, right? And agony, right? So then you're just like, well, just never mind then. You just sit there and you just be my companion, and I'm not really going to let you silence me. And I mean, like going back to this question of like what this generation is doing and like what's happening, how to feel and all of that, there are a lot of silencing forces, and we're meant. Well, I mean, I'm not saying there's any like individual, but that's doing this maybe, varying degrees. It's good for the system of injustice if we feel disempowered. Let me just put it that way. And so if we accept that voice, then we accept that force on us. So then you resist. That is a form of resistance when you say, oh no, I'm thinking something here, and I'm going to write it down. Thank you for that question. Oh, one more? Sorry.
So it sounds like a lot of the writing that you do and a lot of the editing that you do works as a means to express a message about being proactive towards some end.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that art is more powerful when it's used this way?
Right, that's an interesting question. I would say when I'm writing poems, I'm not actually trying to do anything other than increase my understanding. And that's what I think it's for, is to increase understanding, complexity of thinking. Not, as soon as you say, no, I have an ideology and you have to conform to my ideology and I'm trying to persuade you of my ideology, it's just something else. It's a persuasive text, which is fine, but it's not the same thing for me. The tool of art is to navigate mystery, to help us, for me, to navigate mystery, to celebrate mystery, difference, not knowing, to make room for it, to help us tolerate it, understand it, but not necessarily to understand it, to encounter it, to tolerate it, navigate it, and understand it as something that you can't, and that you don't want to pin down. So I'm not sure I would characterize my writing in that way. That said, I've developed like a sort of poetics and a worldview. I have a cosmology, a way of seeing the world and the universe. So when I sit down to write, I'm thinking about those things and trying to think about them more deeply. The editing might be different though, right? I mean, and that's interesting. I think the editing does have more of a slightly instructional, didactic mode and purpose. So that's interesting, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I like doing it, because that's a slightly different impulse. Yeah, but the art in here, by and large, I have to really look at it, but to say this for sure, that it's not didactic. So, but then when you frame them together and you say, oh look, this is all doing this and it's saying this, and if you look at it this way, it will change you. That's the didactic gesture, but that's the editor's gesture, not the artist's. So, thanks. That's a great question. It's really interesting to think about it. Thanks, y'all. That was great. Thank you.